Don't play with it, don't be dishonest. Ay, still not understanding.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to look at artificial selection as well as speciation and the mechanisms of reproductive isolation. In the previous video, which was part 2, we looked at the theories of evolution that included Lamarckism, Darwinism, as well as punctuated equilibrium. So if you haven't watched that video, I do suggest that you go back to it and start with part 1, then part number 2. So before we start, I want us to just get a brief of what Lamarckism and Darwinism are talking about. Here I have a table that compares the two. We did say that Lamarck uses the law of use and disuse, while Darwin has to do with the theory of natural selection. When you look at the table with Lamarckism, he believes that members of a population are the same. So like we did the example of the giraffe. So giraffes had short necks, while Darwin believes that there is a great deal of variation among organisms of the same species. So giraffes had short necks and some had long necks. So Lamarck also believes that organisms change whatever characteristic they want to. Like the giraffe stretch their neck because they want to reach the trees at the top, or the leaves at the top of the tree. While with Darwin, he believes that a population is the one that changes, and they change genetically, and not just changing their characteristic. So with Lamarck, they change because they want to. But with Darwin, they change through natural selection because of environmental pressures. So the changes in the environment allow the organism to genotypically change. And I think with both of them, the characteristic is passed on to the offspring. However, Lamarck was rejected for one particular reason, that there's no supporting evidence to show how organisms change, and organisms do not change because they want to, but they change through or due to environmental pressures. So we take the theory of natural selection by Darwin. Now I've made a few notes about the theory of natural selection. One thing that we need to take note of is that it acts on variation. Organisms which are better suited for the changes, like food availability, shelter, competition, and predation, these organisms are better suited to survive. Now, when we say better suited, it means they have a favorable characteristic that allows the organism to survive and reproduce. Now, when they reproduce, they pass on this allele to their offspring, which allows for speciation. Now, let's look at artificial selection. In comparison to natural selection, artificial selection is where humans select the desirable characteristic. And this is in order to satisfy human needs. A new organism will be bred. Now, the example that I like to use is the one where a donkey and a horse are used to produce a mule. So a donkey is a different species compared to a horse. A donkey is needed for its strength, while a horse is used for its speed to make the mule. A mule will have both these characteristics. So it is a new species. We already know what the term species means. And a species is fertile, while a mule is infertile. So for you to get a mule, you constantly have to mix a donkey and a horse. So the takeaway here is that artificial selections, humans select their desirable characteristic to breed a new species, which is different from natural selection. Let's compare the two. through natural selection, the environment selects, while with artificial selection, humans are the selective force. At the very same time, through natural selection, nature selects because of environmental suitability to suit the changes in the environment, while with artificial selection, it is to satisfy human needs. Lastly, in natural selection, selection occurs within organisms of the same species, and artificial selection will occur between two different species or more than one species. And when you check in artificial selection, a new different species is formed, in this case, the mule. And also note that the mule is infertile. Now here I have a snippet from the examination guidelines about artificial selection. We must look at an example of a domesticated animal as well as a crop species. Let's look at a past exam paper. So here we have Ancon sheeps that were domesticated sheep that were bred from a single affected lamb born with a recessive dwarf mutation. They had very short legs that were considered an advantage for farmers because they were unable to jump over ordinary stone walls or fences. Now the first question says, according to the text, what caused the short legs in this breed of sheep? So what you do here, you go through the text, we can see it is born with a recessive dwarf mutation. Now the next question, it says, suggest a reason why the normal-legged sheep would be a problem for farmers. So the ones with short legs are unable to jump over the walls. It means that the ones with normal legs will be able to jump over and get lost. Moving on to the next question, it says, explain one benefit for the farmer keeping these Ancon sheep. So why do they keep the ones with the short legs? It's because they cannot run and therefore they will not get lost. Now, if you look at how we answered the question, in this case, we're explaining, we give the how as well as the why. So our how would be that they have short legs and they can't run and therefore they will not get lost. Now the next question, it says farmers use artificial selection to breed heads of Ancon sheep. We give the definition for artificial selection. That's quite simple. Humans select the desirable characteristic to breed a new organism. What's more important in your answer is that you state that humans are selecting a desirable trait. Here we have domesticated crop. They say males belong to genus Zea, which includes wild teosinte and domesticated maize. The teosinte produces a cob with only 6 to 12 kernels in a row, protected by a hard outer covering. Modern maize produced by farmers have a cob consisting of 500 or more exposed kernels in as many as 20 rows. We have the diagram that shows the teosinte and the modern maize. So in the first question, we looked at a domesticated organism, and now we're looking at a plant species. First question, it says, name the process through which humans produce modern maize. And we know we're doing artificial selection since they have selected the specific characteristic. 3.1.2, you state one negative effect the process named in question 3.1.1 may have on a species. Well, artificial selection is not only good for human needs, there may be side effects to artificial selection. I think artificial selection can be part of genetic engineering. So in this case, it can increase chances of having genetic disorders and or I think the first one would have been decrease in biodiversity. Or we could say that it decreases the gene pool. Just to explain that gene pool is the number of genes present in a population, so variation would be decreased. Now let's look at the third question. It says, describe how the process mentioned in question 3.1.1 was carried out on maize. So it has to be specific to the maize. So firstly, humans will select the maize with a cob that has many kernels. And then it will be interbred over many years. I think it's a 3-mark question, so we do have 3 points. Now the last question says, explain one economic benefit that producing modern maize cob has to farmers. So we're looking at a monetary advantage for farmers, and we know that high yield, high profit. What you need to ensure is that your question answers both parts, because explain is a 2-mark question. You need to give us a how and the why. So increase in yield will be our how and more profit will be the why. Or you could say that more rows in a kernel would be sold at a higher price. Now that's the end of this question. We look at speciation. I think the takeaway from artificial selection is that new species are formed. So speciation is the formation of new species. Now from the examination guideline, you should know the definition of a species, which we defined already. And let's look at this definition on the exam guidelines. That is, similar organisms that are capable of interbreeding to produce a fertile offspring. Now the second part looks at speciation and extinction and the effect of each on biodiversity. So you will get questions that ask you about that in the exam. As opposed to artificial selection, speciation by natural means increases biodiversity because organisms are varied. We already spoke about the gene pool. Now let's look at speciation through geographic isolation. A geographic isolation would be a physical barrier that separates a population, could be the sea, river, mountain, lake, etc. Now they say that this population is split by a geographical barrier. The population is then split into 2. There will therefore be no gene flow between the 2 populations that are split. Since each population may be exposed to different environmental conditions or different selective pressures, natural selection will occur independently of each or in each of the 2 populations, such that the individuals become different, whether genotypically and phenotypically, that even if they were to mix again, they can no longer interbreed. This is because they are now different species. Remember that a species is capable of interbreeding to produce a fertile offspring. Now let's explain it in a diagram or diagrammatic way. You have a population. It's one population. And we can say a population of rabbits, for example. This population is then split by a geographical barrier. We could say the river. Now, our river separates the population into two, 1 and 2. Now, if natural selection happens independently, then they will experience pressure or selective pressure independently, and then our population too changes genotypically and phenotypically. They have now become different, their genotype and their phenotype, that even if they were to mix again, they can no longer interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. It means they have become new species. Now let's go back to our exam guidelines. You should make sure that all these parts are explained properly, but in any example that you're given, like we did the river, you must mention that the population is split by a river or separated by a river, and mention the name of the population and as well as the environmental conditions that make them different. Now, there are different examples that you should know of. They say one of the following: Galapagos finches, the tortoises, the different land plants on different land masses. You can look at the baobab or the protea, and an example of any mammal. Just practice that, applying speciation. Now, we also have mechanisms of reproductive isolation. They say that speciation does not only occur when species are or population is split by a geographical barrier. It can still happen even if there's no geographical barrier that separates the population, like breeding at different times of the year. Some breed in summer, some breed in winter or spring, whatever the case may be. Species have their specific courtship behavior. Some use chemicals, some physically do courtship. And courtship is a way in which organisms use to attract their mating partner. Please do have a look at the different examples so that you are able to apply in the exam. Then we have plants' adaptation to different pollinators. Some plants are adapted for insects, some for birds, and some are wind pollinated. So it does act as an isolating barrier for reproduction to take place. We also have infertile offspring and prevention of fertilization. So infertile offspring is just naturally they are born infertile. It acts as a barrier for reproduction. And with prevention of fertilization, there are things that just normally prevent fertilization from taking place. Example I can think of is there are differing reproductive organs. The takeaway here is that these mechanisms are not geographic. Let's look at an exam paper. They say frogs produce different sounds to attract females of the same species to the breeding sites. The call signals the start of breeding season. H. ornate breeds in summer, and the males make a strong chorus sound. However, P. adsperus breeds in spring, and the males make a deep, low-pitch whoop. The first question, you list 3 requirements that organisms must satisfy before they can be called a species. Going back to the exam guideline, we did say that organisms have similar characteristics. The organisms are able to interbreed, and lastly, to produce a fertile offspring. Next question, you use the text above to identify and describe 2 reproductive isolation mechanisms between these frogs. So we must first identify the reproductive isolation mechanism. We looked at the breeding season in the extract, so we must mention that breeding at different times of the year, and then we must then describe it, which will be H. ornate breeds in summer, and the other one breeds in spring. Now, they also spoke about their mating call, that the strong chorus sound and the deep low whoops, that would be courtship behavior, so species specific courtship behavior, because H. ornate has a strong chorus sound and the other one will have a deep low pitch whoop. So one mark goes to the mechanism and the other mark goes to the description. Now, the next question, they say frogs become reproductively isolated because they are different species. You describe speciation through geographic isolation. So here we use our exam guidelines to describe speciation through geographic isolation, exactly as stated in the exam guidelines. Now let's look at another example. They say eastern tiger snakes living on islands of mainland Australia have longer jaws than mainland population of snakes. The diet of island snakes includes large prey such as seagull chicks, while the diet of the mainland snake consists of small prey such as frogs and mice. Now the first question says, describe the jaw of the island snake. So you go back to extract. They have longer jaws. And that's 341A. We go to 341B. They say, what is the staple diet of mainland snake? You go back to the extract. The mainland feeds on small prey such as frog and mice. Now, 342, you give the definition of a species. We know that organisms with similar characteristics that can interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. Now, last question, you describe how island and mainland snake have evolved into different species. This is the same thing as explained in the exam guidelines, rather. However, you must be specific to the snake. So the first statement is the populations of snakes was separated into two by an island, which is our geographical barrier. It then splits into two. Now, after it splits into two, there is no longer gene flow between the two populations of snake. Now, these two populations will then undergo natural selection. This is because they are exposed to different environmental conditions. So natural selection is going to occur independently, such that they become genotypically as well as phenotypically different. That even if they were to mix again, they can no longer interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. You state the last statement, they have become new species. A takeaway here is that we mentioned our geographical barrier, and in this case, the different environmental condition, which was their diet. Thank you. See you in part 4.